Hello and welcome to the Didn't Works YouTube channel. Today I've been given the opportunity to A/B test, review an integrated amplifier. But first I need to tell you how this all came about. So my friend Chris invited me to go out and have a listen to some live music. I haven't heard any live music for a couple of years, so it's something I've really missed due to pandemic and restrictions and so on and so forth. And he co-organised and promoted an event for an artist called Stephen Fearing, fairly local to me, and it looked like quite a small, fairly intimate concert. So I thought, this sounds great, I'll go and have a look. And I was absolutely blown away. It was so good to hear live music, particularly very well played and performed live music. And I really enjoyed it. I'm also got myself a copy or two copies of albums he's got, and I got them signed, which was really good. And another great thing about things like this is the artist told us some of the stories behind the songs, which makes it all the more intimate, I suppose. So when you hear a particular track, you know some of the story behind it. Okay. On the back foot of that, Chris brought his LFD Mistral amplifier, which is a really high quality integrated amplifier with a lovely built-in phono stage for me to have a try and do a video on. So I thought I would. And I had a few things to do today. I had a couple of repairs I needed to catch up on, which I've done. And I've now got the opportunity to sit back and have a listen. So obviously, one of the first things I played was this. And all I've done is completely taken my, call it the Didn't Works system, right out of the loop. So literally all we've got is my Funk Firm sorted Technics SL1210 Mark II going straight into the LFD Mistral phono stage, inbuilt phono stage on this integrated amp, and then running speaker wire out into my Spendor Classic 2.3s. Now, I suppose I really should discuss a little bit about LFD as a company. Basically, it's the brainchild of a couple of pretty clever blokes, really. You've got Professor Malcolm Hawksford and Dr. Richard Buse, who are people synonymous with the hi-fi audio, sound reproduction, general field of expertise for many, many years. Both of those guys have had connections with Celestion back in the day. I believe one of those two is probably Malcolm Hawksford, developed the controller for the System 6000 subs. So they've been in and around the audio industry for many, many years. Now, the particular amplifier that Chris has loaned me to have a listen to is quite expensive for an integrated amplifier. Now, when you tend to look at an integrated amplifier, you think, well, where am I spending all of this money? Because you've just got a single box with a couple of dials on the front and a load of inputs on the back. However, I do really quite like integrated amplifiers. It's a one-box solution. Now, my personal route is obviously the turntable goes into a phono stage, which then goes into a preamp, which then goes into a power amp. That's many boxes, many joins, many connection points, many variants of wires and connections and mains leads that connect the whole thing together. Now, I suppose it could be argued that having a separate or dedicated phono stage is better than an internal one. So certainly in my case, the internal phono stage on my Quad Artera preamp is okay, but the Vincent dedicated phono stage is probably a little bit nicer sounding. However, when you have an integrated amplifier, I've always asked myself, are those, for instance, my Pioneer had its own phono stage and inbuilt DAC. My Air Studios A9 dual mono construction integrated amplifier was a one-box solution. However, I very quickly discovered that if you use an external DAC and an external phono stage, they were actually better than what was internal. But that was a £900 integrated amplifier. This is several £1,000s. So you would hope that they'd gone to town on the components inside it. Well, I'm not going to take it apart because it's not mine. I will try and find a picture online of the internals, but take it from me, it's incredibly heavy for what is not really a particularly large amplifier. So if we move on to how it sounds, so like I said, funk firm, sort of Technics 1210, straight into the internal phono stage, speaker wires out to my Spendor Classic 2.3s. There's a couple of things I've got to mention. I'm a big fan of the speaker terminals being at opposite ends of the amplifier. I don't know why, it's just something I'm a little bit fussy about. And on the LFD, they're off to one side, which is not the end of the world, but I quite like seeing those channels separated. So that's one thing. However, it's quite small, so you can fit it in many racks. One of the problems I've found with my name frame rack is you are very limited to the depth of a piece of equipment that will fit in there. Obviously that rack was designed for name equipment, and obviously name equipment's not particularly deep. But my quad, my Meridian, Benchmark and various other components do all fit in there. But there's particular amplifiers that I've considered that certainly won't. One of them was a Krell KSA, which I quite fancied, but it would not fit in the rack. And I don't really want to change the whole rack just for the amplifier or sit a power amplifier on the floor. So in the instance of this Mistral amplifier, you're not restricted with space. It would probably fit in virtually any rack because it's not particularly wide and it's not particularly deep. It is, however, pretty heavy. Let's move on to the sound. So I connected it up as I've discussed, turned it on and used what I sort of have as not a reference record, but a record I know incredibly well because I've listened to it on streaming, CD and vinyl over and over and over again. And that's one of my Deadmau5 albums. In fact, it's this one, which, typical Deadmau5, it's incredibly well produced and it's a genre of music that I quite like. And as I'm so familiar with it, I thought that was the best piece of music for me to instantly detect any differences or preferences between my own setup using pre-power and separate phono stage in comparison to an integrated amplifier. Well, what I've got to say straight away is I'm often asked what sounds better, and better is incredibly hard to decipher because better is subjective. Now, probably one way you could answer that is by explaining if it's brighter, if it's more bassy, if the sound stage is different, so on and so on. And pick up on the word I said there, different, because that's really what we should all be saying, that this amplifier sounds different to my amplifier. And I'll try and explain how, rather than just saying it's better. So in a nutshell, I could be convinced in saying that yes, this LFD amplifier is probably better than what I'm using at the minute, but that doesn't explain anything. So, playing the record, the first thing I noted was elevated HF detail. This integrated amplifier actually offers slightly better HF detail over my setup. Same speakers, same record, same cartridge. It's slightly better in the HF, which is not unpleasant. I really enjoy the fact that you are extracting somewhat more from the record. There is a drawback to that though. I do detect slightly more surface noise from the vinyl itself using this LFD amp over my setup. But that's probably the somewhat tapered off HF on my setup is hiding some of that surface noise. Take it whether that's better or worse. It's up to you whether you like a more detailed sound or if you would be distracted by some of the surface noise of the vinyl itself. In terms of bass, now this is interesting. I would imagine my 200 watt per channel Meridian amp is going to offer way more power, way more scale, way more wallop. Actually, the LF on this Mistral amplifier is really impressive. It does hold a very good grip over my particular speakers. And I think that's somewhat down to the enormous transformer inside. That explains why that amplifier is so heavy. The rest of the tonal characteristics of the amplifier, because that's all we're talking about here, nothing else has changed. Same cartridge, same deck, same record, same speakers, everything is much the same. is the overall presentation is very musical. The separation of instruments is very defined. I actually really enjoyed listening to this amplifier. It's very different to mine. When I switched back to mine, as I said, I did notice a slight reduction in HF, which in my opinion was a reduction in surface noise on the vinyl, but it wasn't in a way that I was put off by my setup, that I'm quite used to that level of detail and it's more than enough. And actually the reduction in surface noise on the vinyl I preferred, but I did notice that the air and space around the instruments, I have to say, the Mistral was better. But one thing to consider here as well, that my phono stage is valve, which does add I don't want to say an air because I've just been talking about the air around the instruments, but does add a vocal characteristic that was slightly more preferable to me over the Mistral. But in a nutshell, for an integrated amplifier, so you've got a one box solution here, I could not fault that in any way, shape, form or fashion. Very small, compact, would fit in many racks, very musical, very detailed, and a one box solution. What a great concept. Integrated amplifiers are very, very good because it does cut down on all those boxes, all the wires, in some instances multiple remote controls as well. But to explain the sound quality of this, in a nutshell, musicality. Very, very musical, a very joyous amplifier to listen to. And I should imagine if you put an even better record player than my Technics in front of it, you would be rewarded and rewarded and rewarded. It's like everything else. The better the front end is, the more you get out of it. The better the vinyl is, the more you'll get out of it. So really, I couldn't fault it in any way. What a fantastic piece of equipment. I can't really discuss much more about it. I haven't got time to research the history of LFD. Amplifiers is not my thing, but I really enjoyed the opportunity of having a chance to listen to this because it was very different sounding to mine. Whether it's better would be up to somebody else to decide because I like them both, but I like them both for different reasons. There is going to be some level of bias here because it's comparing my own system, which I'm very familiar with, compared to a foreign system that I'm not so familiar with. But when I plugged it in, there was nothing that bothered me about it. And that's the ticket there. You don't want to put something into your system that you're questioning it straight away. If you question it, then there's something wrong. And with plugging this amplifier in and listening to it today, no problems at all. What a fantastic, extremely well designed, very heavy, nice sounding integrated amplifier. Cheers, Chris. I really appreciate the loan. I'm sorry this review probably doesn't do that product justice, but amplifiers are just not my thing. I don't really spend hours and hours and hours researching amplifiers, although I probably should, because I bet if I tried some of the speakers I've had in the past that might have been slightly more rolled off in the HF or not as detailed as potentially some of the others have with that amplifier, I think I would possibly rethink some of the things I'd said, because that amplifier certainly extracts an enormous amount of detail from the record itself. So let me have a think of something that was a bit rolled off in the HF. My Spendor SA1s would have probably sounded better on that LFD amp than they did on my setup. Anyway, that's the Ditton Works review today, which is, believe it or not, 14 minutes long. It's mad how quickly the time flies when you're talking. Anyway, guys, take care. Enjoy your day. I'll speak to you soon.
I left my hometown for salvation, came back banging on my drum, and lighting fires to keep me warm, blowing every chance the kingdom come. I got got this chip up on my shoulder, diamond sharper than a knife. I picked it up to save my soul, and I put it down to save my life. And it's holy, holy. I left my hometown for salvation, came back banging on my drum and lighting fires to keep me warm, blowing every chance the kingdom come. I got this chip up on my shoulder, diamond sharper than a knife. I picked it up to save my soul, and I put it down to save my life.